A lot of the discussion in Tacticus focuses around top meta characters and how to get the most out of them in modes such as guild raids. And rightly so, but in this series, the Heroes Gallery, we're going to go through some of the less talked about heroes in the roster and give them a little bit of love. Each episode I'm going to go through 3 characters, one from each alliance, and review them in relation to a number of criteria. This time we're looking at Vindicta, Tanksmasha and Typhus. I'm going to look at each character based on 4 criteria: how they perform in guild raids, how they perform in guild wars, Horde Modes, so this is everything from LREs to campaign, and just a general fun playability metric that I think is sometimes overlooked. So Vindicta. Her active and passive both work around her being a lady with a flamethrower. Her active lets her attack twice, which can do nice burst damage, and her passive gives her nice AoE flame damage in quite a large area. In terms of her traits, she's got heavy weapon, which means that if she doesn't move, she does additional damage, and Act of Faith, which is a bonus to critical hit chance and critical damage based on the number of Imperials that have died or that have killed enemy units. Let's look at her for guild raids. In the future, there might be some emergent ranged multi-hit team. I'm currently recording in late November 25. We're all looking forward to the Farsight Legendary release event. It's a little bit unclear at this stage whether or not there's going to be this new ranged multi-hit team. I'm sure people can watch this in the future and either look at me as a prophet or a complete idiot because it never emerged. Perhaps in that future, Vindicta might have a role in some ranged multi-hit team. Her hits might be a little bit low for that, but perhaps against certain bosses she might play a role. I'm not going to speculate on that. I want to deal with the game as it is currently. So there's no ranged multi-hit option that she can be a part of. She does have some possible use against Winged Prime, which is one of the tougher side bosses to deal with in the game. Winged Prime has a damage resistance against all types of damage except flame and blast damage, and Vindicta does flame damage. Whenever Winged Prime takes flame or blast damage, it also takes additional damage as well. So you want to get as many attacks in with either flame or blast against Winged Prime as possible to activate this passive extra damage as much as possible. The fact that Vindicta gets 2 attacks 1 turn with her active makes her a pretty nice fit against this boss, though not necessarily the top pick there. When theory crafting with some guildmates, we considered whether or not it's even worth trying to use Aonshi with Vindicta so that you can use her active twice on subsequent turns. It probably doesn't work out. It's probably not a great choice, but it could be a lot of fun if you're not in too competitive a guild. So send me some videos of that team comp if you use it. All that being said, it's sometimes just best to ignore Winged Prime. My guild's found that even as high as maybe Legendary 2, Legendary 3 for us, Winged Prime is not worth the tokens that he takes. We tend to ignore him up to a certain threshold. So if the only side boss that a character is useful against is often ignored, well, it doesn't speak so much for how useful that character is. If you were going to use Vindicta against Winged Prime, what team would I recommend? Well, obviously Vindicta herself, but Ahriman potentially makes sense here. His passive gives a buff to anyone dealing flame or psychic damage to somebody on a hex that's on fire, so he's going to give a buff to Vindicta. Maybe Thad as well. So Thaddeus does blast damage himself, so even more activations of Winged Prime's damage vulnerability. But because of his passive, he also buffs Vindicta too. I'm aware there's very recently, as of today of the time of recording, been a leak of a potential buff of Thad that would improve his passive, so that'll only help the synergy between him and Vindicta. The last part that I'd recommend is using Forge Fiend. Again, more instances of fire damage. The fact that you've set Winged Prime's Hex on fire with Vindicta means that you can use Forge Fiend to deal additional damage, or you can work the other way to get Ahriman's buff. So you might use Forge Fiend to set the Hex on fire so that you get Ahriman's buff for Vindicta's attack, or both attacks if she's using her active. Overall, I gave her a C- for Guild Raids. To be honest, this might even have been a bit generous. It wouldn't be unwarranted to give her a D. She does have some use against a tricky side boss, but she's not a major part of any particularly important teams. Okay, Guild War. So on defense, this is when the game is controlling her. She can be a bit tricky if ignored if she gets onto a high ground, but to be honest, she's not too difficult to handle. If you prioritize her early, she's very easy to deal with. But on offense, she absolutely can be useful. The computer won't always know to prioritize taking her out in the way that you as a player do, which means that you can sometimes get really good double activations with her active, especially if you can position well and wait to bait the opponent in. You might even get the heavy weapon bonus on that as well. So overall, I gave her a C in Guild Wars. Again, there's better characters, but there are also worse. There's definitely some utility here, but it's not like she's one of my top picks to use in Guild War. Horde Modes, where I think Vindicta really stands out. There is, of course, the Sisters of Battle campaign event, where she's one of the core characters. And she's Imperial, so she can be used in a lot of different campaigns as well. I think she's got excellent crowd control. This is useful both for campaigns and more general Horde modes. Her only downside is that she really does need to attack from range, or else she can get swamped if you're struggling. But this is, I think, just a nice kind of tactical challenge. Work out what characters you can use her with to give her the space to operate. Overall, I gave her a B for Horde modes. I think she's very usable in this event, and if and when she appears in certain LRE tracks, she's certainly somebody that I'd look to bump up a little bit, because I think she can help a lot in these Horde modes. Okay, fun. Honestly, I think Vindicta's a really fun character to use. I think there's a good reason Snowprint made her one of the first characters to unlock. There's just something satisfying about setting half the battlefield on fire. I don't know if I can explain that in more reductive terms. I think she's a really fun character, and I gave her a B+. In terms of how to improve her, I think there's a couple of dimensions she could improve. First of all, it would be nice if there's this ranged multi-hit team that emerges, and perhaps there's some place for her there. Sometimes the best way to buff a character is introducing new characters that synergize with them. I think it would be nice to give her a relic that interacts with fire damage and crit chance. So for instance, it could be a relic that gives her an improved crit chance when she's attacking an enemy on a fire hex, or more crit damage if she's attacking an enemy on a fire hex. I think that would make a lot of sense for her, and it wouldn't break the game. I think as well, for the Sisters of Battle in general, Act of Faith could be improved. It's a little bit anemic in my view, and especially the fact that it does very, very little against raid bosses means that it's limited in what its role in the game is going to be. I would like just a small change to Act of Faith, that the crit chance and crit damage goes up, not just based on Imperials dying or taking out enemies, but perhaps also if Sisters of Battle in particular attack raid bosses. That could then give some role to them in raids, and just give them a little bit of a bump in a game format where a lot of them aren't visible at the moment. Okay, moving on to Tanksmasha. Snowprint decided to give Tanksmasha a PhD thesis rather than an active ability. This took up the entire page when I was writing it out. I think a lot of us have seen this in action. To put it simply, Tanksmasha picks a direction, charges, and just clears everything out that's in the way until it hits one of a certain number of things that will stop it dead in its tracks. This I've generally found is more useful for disrupting positioning than it is for doing damage, and I think that's what its best role is. His passive is, in a way, a little bit similar to Ragnar's. So when he moves a certain distance, so 2 hexes, he gets additional damage and also has a damage reduction. So he's a movement-based character. In terms of traits, he's got Beast Slayer, so he does extra damage to big targets and vehicles. Get Stuck In is the Orc faction trait, so this means that for every 2 hits that they have as base, there's a chance that they do 1 extra hit. This chance goes up to 100% if there are enough orcs attacking the same target. He's got Unstoppable, so he doesn't get stopped by things like fire, barbed wire, etc. And as much as this isn't a trait, I've put that he's movement 4 down here as well. It's a very mobile character. Guild Raids, to be honest, he's just not got enough hits to be very viable in this format. The only thing that really speaks in his favour is his high movement, his traits, high movement, Unstoppable, and Beast Slayer, all make him, I think, not terrible, but it's not enough to make up for the fact that he's got quite low hits. But perhaps if you're using Boss Gulgorts as one of your main buffers, perhaps he's an okay substitute, but he's lower down on the list for me compared to a lot of other characters, and it's for that reason I've given him a D for Guild Raids. I really don't think he should be very high up on your list of characters to use. In terms of Guild War, again, defense, he's just not a threat when the computer's controlling him. They I think don't really... The computer uses his active to deal as much damage as possible, whereas I think really its role is breaking up positioning, not doing damage itself. On offense, I think there is a slightly better use. I've used him to break up Death Guard clusters, which is one of the strongest teams in Guild Wars, which allows me to pick off 1 or 2 of the enemy characters once I've cleared through with Tanksmasha. So there is some use there, but again, this isn't enough to really grant him much of a mark, and I've given him a D. Lastly, Horde Modes. He is used in the Octarius campaign. I've seen some advice around that suggests leaving him out, that perhaps he's not worth the risk of him dying. I personally used him for the Octarius campaigns. I think if you can put a 5th body on the field, that's a good idea. I saw some use for him. I did use him. Moving on to non-campaign Horde Modes, I think he needs a lot of space to move, and this is not always great in Horde Modes if you're getting swamped. I think his active is decent crowd control. Again, it's more about breaking up than doing damage, but when you've got lots of enemies packed in close together, it can be a good way of breaking out and creating space for you to move. Biggest issue though is that it's single use. So again, unfortunately, I gave him a D for Horde Modes. I think he can be left out of Octarius even if I didn't. And he's just not that great at crowd control, given that his normal attack only does 1 attack. Okay, moving on to fun. I think orcs in general just have a high baseline of fun. They're a great faction. They're, I think, not just in Tacticus, but one of Warhammer 40k's most iconic and enjoyable factions. They've got great lore. They're just good fun. I personally find high mobility characters very satisfying. I like that feeling of kind of nipping around the battlefield. There's really something to that for me. And look, he's a mohawk orc on a squig, right? What more can you want? He is a good fun character. I gave him a B-. I think the minus relative to Vindicta is that his use and his play isn't as satisfying at the moment, in my view. But he's still a very fun character. I'm not gonna knock his enjoyability. How to improve Tanksmasha? I think you wouldn't need to radically redesign him to actually make him a pretty usable character. So I think he does need 4 hits. This could either be done by upping his base hits, or you could change his passive to give him an extra hit when he moves a certain distance. The way that that would interact with the thresholds for the Get Stuck In, the Orcs faction trait, is that it would mean that he's now getting a +2 hits rather than a +1 hit from Get Stuck In, which would make him comparable or competitive with what I see as the baseline for a good multi-hit character, so 6 hits. Provided that you are getting that Get Stuck In. I'd be happy to see his damage reduced to compensate for this a little bit, but I think giving him 4 hits for me is an absolute must. I think you should nerf the damage on his active a little bit, but let him use it every 2 turns. I think the point of it is not to think of it as a damaging active, but as I've said lots of times, about clearing space up, disrupting, and allowing your orcs to get in, that kind of aggressive chaos that I think is emblematic of the orcs as a faction. Letting him use it lots of times, I think, would really build into this. More generally, I would love to see a high mobility buffer in the game. This is quite more abstract thinking, but maybe a White Scars character that gives a damage buff to any character that's moved, let's say moved 3 hexes or moved 4 hexes in that particular turn. Obviously, Tanksmasha could play a role in that. That's just something I'd like to see, but again, perhaps that just goes back to my personal enjoyment of high mobility characters. Okay, last character we're looking at today is Typhus. So his active's Plague Wind. This is a big AoE psychic damage effect that can really hit quite a few enemies, especially if they're clumped together. His passive is going to deal a bit of additional damage to 1 random adjacent enemy. It can be quite a chunky amount of damage, so I wouldn't overlook it. He's also got traits galore. Contagions of Nurgle is a really nice trait. It gives an armor reduction to any enemies within a certain radius, but that radius kind of creeps out as the battle goes on. He's a Psyker. He's got resilience. The first time he goes down to 0 HP, he actually goes down to 1. And he's got Terminator armor, which gives him I think it's a 75% damage reduction on the first attack he receives per round. In guild raids, he's a 2nd tier substitute in the Neuro team. He is a Psycho, so you can use him in the Neuro team. If you're early a game and you got lucky and pulled him out of a 10 pull, and you're already leveling him up for the Chaos campaigns, and you really like the Neuro team, maybe you use him in there, but it's pretty marginal use. I gave him a C- because, which is a little bit higher than the description I just sort of verbally gave. At the end of the day, you can still use him in the Neuro team. It's not like he's completely useless. But as I say, it's a pretty marginal use case. I could have justified giving him a D here. Perhaps C- is a little generous. Okay, in Guild War, I think he's a really stellar character. On defense, he's part of the Death Guard team, which I think one of the hardest teams to break in Guild Wars. On offense, again, same team, but you can use his active in ways that are just absolutely brutal. For those who don't know, the Death Guard team for war builds around Rockbone and Maladus. Rockbone is a Chaos healer who is able to revive Chaos allies that fall around him. If you combine him with all of the really chunky, especially Death Guard characters or Chaos Terminators, it can make for a really hard to kill team. So to use Maladus, who's normally paired with, Maladus has high armor, Terminator, and resilient, just like Typhus does, meaning that you need to use 1 attack to get him down to 1 HP, another attack to kill him, Rockbone then stands him back up, and he again takes 2 more attacks to get down. That's if you can even get him down that far with his high armor and his Terminator ability. By the same logic, Typhus makes sense in this super tanky Death Guard team. Who else would I use alongside these 3? Well, just as an example, there's a much wider discussion we can have about the best options, but I might use Rask because of his additional shielding, and I might use Toth because of his self-heal, his Terminator armor, and some other interactions that I'll talk about momentarily. So Guild Wars, I don't hesitate to give Typhus an A. He's a really useful member of one of the strongest Guild War teams. Okay, Horde Modes. I think in Horde Modes, his aura really helps to crack tough high defense enemies, especially when you're trying to really punch up in things like LREs. Again, his active is absolutely stellar. And what I really like about him is that he's bulky in an LRE track that usually contains a lot of squishy heroes. So the fact that he's a tough psyker, I think, really improves his usability in often quite a difficult LRE track. He's good in the Death Guard campaign event, and you can use him in all of the Chaos campaigns, but I think he's got especially strong synergy in Siamham Mirror, with two cool characters in particular. So first of all, Abraxas. Abraxas's active and Typhus's active work really well together. On the turn Abraxas uses his active, he summons additional demons for everyone that's hit with psychic damage. Well, Typhus's active gives you a way of hitting a lot of people with psychic damage. You can summon a genuinely ungodly number of demons by using this combination together. This is not just in campaigns. You can do this in any Horde mode where both of these are viable options as well. The other combination or synergy is with Toth. Toth's active does additional damage to everyone that's taken psychic damage this turn. So you use Typhus to do a big AoE psychic damage. Everyone's already looking pretty weak, and then Toth's active comes in and does even more damage to everyone on top of that again. It's for that reason that I gave him an A- in Horde modes. I think the only thing that's stopping him from being an A is that he's not a core character in any of the campaigns. But it's, you know, he's excellent. He's very strong. Okay, when it comes to fun, again, I think big AoE effects are always really enjoyable. I think what's really fun about him is his synergy with Death Guard and the Thousand Suns in particular. And it is really nice to have a psyker that can take a hit. I gave him a B on the fun grade. He's I think just in general an enjoyable character. So how to improve him? I think it would be really nice to let Contagion of Nurgle have some effect on bosses. It doesn't need to have the full effect, but maybe if it was a 5%, 10% damage reduction, so armor reduction, that could be really interesting. That could open up some different options. He might then become a more viable option in the Neuro team, especially when you're working against certain high armor enemies. I have a feeling in general that the Terminator trait needs to be reworked. Terminators are supposed to be your tankiest units on the battlefield, but the fact that I would probably in most cases take the Gravis trait over the Terminator trait means that I think it's not been very well designed. I don't have a positive proposal for how you could redesign it right this second. I'm not sure of a way to do it without breaking the game. But just to suggest that perhaps this trait more broadly does need a rework. To be honest though, overall I think this is just a really well-designed character. Good job, Snowprint. He kind of does what he says on the tin. He's one of those characters where the idea and the narrative very much matches the playstyle. So I think a really well-designed character. Okay, and that finishes it off. These are the 3 characters we've looked at today and the rankings that I gave them. If you've enjoyed this, please do leave a comment down below. Do you agree with my rankings? Do you disagree? Let me know if there's any characters you want me to review in the next Heroes Gallery. Like and subscribe. Have a very nice day.